Welcome to the More We Know podcast with your host and social media influencer, Mir. Gen Zs and millennials.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the More We Know podcast. My name is Mir and I am your host, and I made it a mission to bring you guys mentors in your pocket within an hour or less to provide you real value. I was blessed to have a lot of mentors in my life. A lot of us didn't have that same fortune, so I bring on experts from all around the world. And today's guest is Kara Goldin. Kara Goldin is the founder and CEO of Hint Inc., best known for its award-winning Hint water, the leading unsweetened flavored water. She has received numerous accolades, including being named the EY Entrepreneur of the Year 2017 Northern California and one of InStyle's 2019 Badass 50. Previously, Kara was VP of Shopping Partnerships at America Online. She hosts the tremendous podcast, The Kara Goldin Show. Her first book, which we have right here, which I highly recommend you guys check out, Undaunted, Overcoming Doubt and Doubters, was released in October 2020 and is now a Wall Street Journal and Amazon bestseller. Kara currently resides in San Francisco and has such a phenomenal story, and it's such an honor to have you on today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Kara, I want to take it back a little bit because I really want to get into this book because the title, talking about doubters and, this concept of haters and people saying you can't do this. And it's a crazy concept because we deal with a lot of this negativity, but I want to take it back a little bit. Can you walk us through, someone listening to now, what did your childhood look like? Growing up, what did your parents do?
Yeah, so I was the last of 5 kids. I grew up in Phoenix, Scottsdale, Arizona. And, I think for me, we almost had like 2 different families, even though it was the same parents. But I have a brother and sister that are 15 and 16 years older than me. So, and then I have a brother and a sister that are just a couple of years older than me. But for me, I think that having older brothers and sisters who had a job, like I'm a little, squirt, right? And they have a job. And of course I'm hearing about all of, the things that they're doing, and they have money to go to the mall with. I mean, that's what I was thinking about when I was 8 or whatever. And I'm thinking it's totally not fair that I can't, get a job. Right. I mean, I don't know if that relates to anybody kind of thinking about this, or maybe their kids are exactly the same way. But I think for me, I wanted to grow up, right? I wanted to go out and sort of like put me in the game. Like that was who I was. But I also wanted to have a good time. I was really, really focused on, I would really not enjoy doing things that were boring. And I mean, that may sound like duh, but I think for me, I just really led my life of having fun. I always thought that you have choices in your life and that you can do things just to make money, or you can actually do things where you're interested. So I worked in a toy store when I was 14. I also had a job for not for very long, but long enough to learn that I was not actually going to become a hairdresser, which was like 1 minute I thought it'd be really fun and I enjoyed doing hair. I did my friend's hair, but I was a receptionist in a hair salon, and I learned all about, this is before like all these booking companies that book and reservations. And so I learned all about those kind of things. And so I was always looking at, you can go and make money doing things that are interesting to you. And I don't know where that really came from, other than the fact that I had older brothers and sisters that were constantly, tinkering and doing different things. And I thought, that's what I'm going to do. But my parents, actually, my dad I call him now a frustrated entrepreneur, because he was he never was an official entrepreneur. He worked at a company called ConAgra. Initially, it was Armor Food Company that he worked at, and he developed a brand called Healthy Choice inside of Armor Food Company. Originally, it's the frozen food dinners that many people have probably had at one point. But he started that, and mad respect for him, especially now thinking about what he did. Having said that, what I've also learned by starting my own company, and he was alive when I was starting my company. I remember asking him, how do I get my product into Safeway? And he's like, oh, I have no idea, because these large companies have these grandfathered in negotiations and contracts where it's essentially they have a whole bunch of products. They go and cut a deal for millions of dollars with these grocery buyers. And then basically you're competing against the other brands inside of your company for the space, because Conagra has a certain set of space. Coca-Cola has a certain set of space. And so anything that is owned by these big brands, they have the umbrella deal. And then you have to negotiate how much is going to get allocated to you. Not that that's easy, but it's just different. And so I now look at that as, again, my dad would complain about those things and all the frustrations. And, he thought he should have, more space in the frozen food case versus some other brands that weren't doing as well. So it was like, I would hear different conversations, but I think what that led me to do is really have an understanding of large companies and how, as a smaller company, how do I go in? How do I not be limited by what that world is all about, and instead just go create and show up and try, and but also understand that it's an uphill battle because I don't have a whole bunch of money behind me and grandfathered in contracts that allow me to automatically go and get a deal with a whatever Safeway or some of these other companies. And then my mom actually, it's interesting. I was talking about her yesterday on an art podcast, which was pretty interesting. My mom was an art history major and grew up in the Midwest, grew up in Minneapolis. And so this is the 1940s. My mom is like going to University of Minnesota, not what people did unless you had tons and tons of money. And so I think back on like none of her friends, she met all new friends when she went to the university, and she loved art and she wanted to, be an art history major. And so she didn't like grow up going to, the MoMA in New York City or whatever. She was in a small town, but she had dreams and she had an interest. So she had a passion for doing what she wanted to do all the time. And so she became an art history major, and then did lots of, cool stuff, taught art in grade school. She did, knew quite a bit about different incredible artists, historical artists. But I think one of the coolest things that she did, and again, she was never really considered an entrepreneur, but looking at kind of what she did, I learned a lot from. She took her interest in understanding artist stories. And so understanding like not only what Picasso's artwork looked like, but also what was the backstory. And she went to the Scottsdale School District and she said, I want to teach people how to recognize the classics, because everybody should really understand the difference between a Picasso versus a Monet. And so again, it's embarrassing as a kid. Like I was like, oh my God, you're going to come into the Scottsdale school system and my mom is going to be, teaching like she's going to run these programs. And, but it was interesting when she passed away, people came to her funeral and people remembered this. And they said, to this day, I don't know a lot about art, but I remember your mom showing me, this is what a Monet looks like. This is a Picasso. And you could like, and just the basics where you could go to a dinner party and somebody would say, who is this? And you'd say, oh, for sure a Monet, right? You for sure this, for the, like she had this down and she taught people, the short list, the cheat sheet of it. And so, and eventually she figured out that she couldn't make any money doing it. And so she went on to do something else. But things like that, growing up around people who had their doubters, were creating. She was a creator, right? She was curious, but she was a creator. And then she was also a helper. Like she wanted to help people understand something that she had made easy for herself. And I think that having that as a backbone of, growing up was incredibly helpful to me to be able to know that I could just go and start something that certainly 16 years ago seemed a little crazy to people.
Wow, what such gems there, because you had siblings as well that were doing a bunch of different things, and then you had your parents. I guess because sometimes for entrepreneurs, at least what I see, even for example, when I started this podcast over a year ago, you tell your parents, you tell someone, and it's a lot of doubt. And you mentioned this a lot in the book, the doubt, that's like the first instinct. So it seems interesting the fact that, it seems like your parents, you learned by example. So they were your mentors effectively in a sense. And at the same time, they taught you those principles of entrepreneurship in different unorthodox ways, which is really unique, it seems.
Yeah. And again, that was coming from people who weren't entrepreneurs. So another thing that I say all the time is that you learn from just being aware, right? And just paying attention. And sometimes you may think, I'm not really learning anything because maybe those people aren't entrepreneurs, but you pick up on things that they're doing that maybe you don't even know you're picking up on, and you go back and look at those things again, as Steve Jobs used to say all the time, the dots eventually connect, right? You think about, why do you know so much? People ask me all the time, how do you know what large companies think about? Like, I'm constantly saying to entrepreneurs that one thing that I talk about in the book is that I used to think that the the people to worry about in my industry are the people with the most experience, the big guys, right? That those are the people that I have to, worry about, the big soda companies, because if I'm really successful, then they'll come and, eat my lunch, right? But what I say to people now is that the problem with these large companies is that they don't want to innovate. They don't want to take the time to incubate something. They're really bad at that. And not only products, but they're really terrible at actually creating new categories, which is what we did. So if you have an idea, you should know about those people and watch out for them, but it's highly unlikely that they go and create something that is going to crush you. It doesn't mean that they don't interrupt you, that they don't steal space from you because they've got relationships with these, big grocery stores or whatever. And that's happened multiple times. But more than anything, when they start to compete against you, they validate what you're doing. And we've seen this over and over again in multiple industries. I mean, in my industry, look at vitamin water. Vitamin water gets started, they end up getting acquired by Coca-Cola for, 12x. $4.2 billion. It's like, could Coke have done that product? Could they have created that product? Maybe. Probably, but they're just not good at incubating a new idea of adding, in this case, vitamins to water. How hard is that to do that? But they don't, they could actually physically do it, but actually incubating the brand in some way is just not what large companies do. And you look at Kodak, just as an example. How many times did they hear about digital film, right? Prior to them, basically going out of business. It's just, and this happens over and over and over again. The large guys, they can't be innovative. They don't like to take risks. So that is the competition that an entrepreneur, or really the reason why entrepreneurs can differentiate and really go out there and do a bang up job, because these large guys, they just don't want to do that.
And I love that you mentioned that, because that's what I feel like hinders a lot of entrepreneurs. Like, I can't go launch this because so and so can do it, or they can do that. But just like you mentioned, the vitamin water acquisition, same thing. Coca-Cola could have indeed launched it, but the difference is someone like you have the tenacity, the fight. You can keep going to a point where it's like Coca-Cola is focusing on all these other things. They're an old company. That's really interesting to see. So I love that you mentioned that, because I think anyone listening to this right now can take from you, Kara, that just go start it, and you're living proof of it. Look what you did. You started a water company, right? Effectively.
Yeah. Well, and I think the thing is too, is that you have to focus on what you can control. And so that's the other thing that I learned and along the way, is that, you're always going to have competition. And in fact, competition, one of the stories I share in the book is actually, I used to think, I remember the first time that Coca-Cola launched a competitive product to Hint, I thought, okay, I should lay off everyone. This is it. We're done. And then what I realized is that having competition when you have nobody else in your category is actually a good thing, because it legitimizes what you're doing. And all you can do is focus on being the best you can do. In our case, the best tasting, the quality of the ingredients, continue to talk about the brand over and over, be better on social media platforms, be better at, your storytelling, your why, because that is where you can differentiate. And that is ultimately what customers will buy.
I love that. And to that point, you've called yourself an accidental entrepreneur. You talk about that a lot. You hinted about it a little bit with growing up with your family, but what exactly did you mean by accidental entrepreneur, and how did it contribute to the success that you're having today?
Well, when I went to college, there was no entrepreneurial classes, right? Like there are today. And entrepreneurs, I don't know. I mean, maybe there were a few out there that were that I kind of had followed. Ron Popeil with his, crazy different machines, the pasta machine and the what's it? I mean, so many others that he did. He's like a genius on so many levels. But yeah, I mean, it just wasn't like, it didn't have the cachet that I guess entrepreneurism has today. And I think, for me, it was, I led with going and following my dreams. I wanted to be a journalist initially. And so I went out to New York to try and figure out how I was going to make that happen. I also wanted to live in New York City. I had these dreams about New York. I'd seen it in the movies. I'd never been there before, but I thought that'd be so cool if I could live by Central Park. And, I just had these ideas of how awesome it would be. And it was awesome. It was great. And I was super happy I did it. And then, I ended up moving to Silicon Valley when I was engaged to my husband that I met in New York. And that's when all of tech was just kind of getting rolling in the, mid 90s. And I think it was kind of leading with this idea of finding something that I was really going to enjoy. The only person that I associated with Silicon Valley was Steve Jobs. And I thought, well, I don't have an engineering major. I mean, how am I going to get a job at what would I do at Apple? And when I heard about this little startup that was a spin out of Apple, just purely by accident, just kind of doing some research on Steve, and this was something he had incubated inside of Apple, I thought, maybe I'll just cold call this guy and see if I can get a job. I mean, I don't know, doing something, and maybe along the way, maybe I'll meet Steve. I never did. Instead, I, went and grabbed coffee with this guy, and he said, wow, you worked in New York for Ted Turner, and you were like at CNN. I mean, that's so cool. And I said, yeah, because I had done it, but it was here. I wanted what he wanted. I wanted to work at Apple and work for Steve. He wanted what I wanted at CNN and Turner. So it's interesting, because something my dad always said to me is that people always will buy brands, right? And he drilled it in my head that he was like, you go and you start out your career, and there's multiple ways to do it, but one way is work for brands, because people remember brands, they elevate brands. And so you hear that somebody's worked for CNN, you hear that somebody's worked for Apple. It almost is like, it doesn't matter what they did there, right? It's just the fact that they were accepted and that they worked in that group. It's just a psychological thing that I think just helps you to get noticed in some way. And so I think that's what I saw along the way, when I ended up getting this role in Silicon Valley, and then we got acquired by America Online, and obviously, saw how Steve Case did things. He's an incredible entrepreneur as well. But I'm mentioning all of this because becoming an accidental entrepreneur, I didn't realize that when I took those jobs, that I was doing it, and it was the perfect, background to be able to go start my own thing. Instead, I did it because I enjoyed it. It satisfied my curiosity. I went into work every day and wanted to contribute in ways that, I felt really good about. And then when I ended up leaving America Online, that's when I, 2 years later, I had this idea for my own company. And so when people said to me, like, isn't that a big risk? Isn't it, isn't that really, you're starting your own company? Starting your own company in and of itself is very daunting, is very scary. But when you look back at these people who are human that I had worked for, and they were incredibly bright and incredibly engaging, but I kept thinking about, well, everybody thought they were crazy when they started. I mean, Ted Turner, everybody thought he was nuts when he was starting CNN. I mean, they're like, this guy in a suit and cowboy boots is saying that, he's going to take on ABC News and CBS News. And as crazy as that sounds today, I mean, look at where CNN is today. And it just reversed itself. So I had the opportunity to be able to work for people like that, who at one point were considered crazy. And then all of a sudden people want to be them. And I think that if you have the ability to do that, I didn't intentionally do that. You could intentionally do that, but that allowed me to know that it's okay that people don't understand what I'm talking about right now with wanting an unsweetened flavored water. It's way ahead of it. Instead, you have to you have to stay true to your brand, put stakes in the ground so people hear it over and over and over again, and find those people who really do understand. And the way that you measure success is seeing that more and more people are getting added to your tribe, right? More and more people over the years started to hear about Hint, tried it. Maybe some of them 16 years ago weren't going through health issues. Maybe they didn't have extra weight to lose or whatever it is, type 2 diabetes. All of a sudden they start seeing it again, and they try it and they're like, wait, that's really interesting. Maybe that's what, maybe that's what I need right now. So anyway, I call myself an accidental entrepreneur because I think there's a lot of ways to get there. And my way was really just, again, satisfying my curiosity, but also recognizing that big things came from these other brands that I worked on that were at one point considered crazy. And I, frankly, when I think back on, being an entrepreneur, there's also different types of entrepreneurs. I love the idea when people think like, why would you need that? Why aren't there, why would I invest in something like that? Whatever it is, because those are the ideas where if you've got an audience that's growing, then you start to see the trends that maybe it's starting to, pick up, and maybe people are starting. The interesting thing is, can you figure out how to find those people? And I think that that's the challenge of it.
So many gems there. And the music to my ears that I love that you mentioned is the audience here is a lot of Gen Zs. So people my age, 20, 21, 22, 23. And what we suffer with sometimes after graduating college is this post, college depression where we don't know what we want to do. We don't know where we want to go. We have all these jobs. We're cold calling random people to sell things all day. It's depressing in its nature. And that's one of the requests I get for this podcast. So for you to say that, you were going around and you were doing different jobs and you didn't quite frankly knew exactly what you wanted to do yet, which is, to the concept of accidental entrepreneur, I think is so inspirational in itself to go from there to what you've built today. And I think it's refreshing for Gen Zs to hear that. So thanks for that.
Yeah. And, I'll share this with you because I have 4 Gen Zers in my house, and 3 of them are in college right now and 1 in high school. And I still have this conversation with them. I mean, when you think about a couple generations ago, I mean, my father, when he was graduating from college, the message to him was, find what you want to do for the rest of your life. I mean, can you imagine like picking that job when you're 21 years old, and, and that's it. And nobody left. In fact, that was his fear, that he couldn't go and find another job because he would have a lot of explaining to do. Today, people work for a couple of years and then they leave. People get fired, and then, and then they go and find another job. In fact, I think that the people that have gotten fired, as long as they know what they've done and they, or, if they did anything, or maybe, they had a crazy boss, or, whatever the story is, as long as they are understanding of exactly what happened, and they won't make the same mistake again. I mean, as long as they weren't indicted or whatever, but you know what I mean? Like, things happen along the way. There's a lot of, the stars have to align on even problems when those kind of things happen. So I guess that the point that I'm making, though, is that it's just the pressure is not as great as maybe you think. The key thing that you have to figure out is, what do I want to do that I enjoy doing every day, and go try. And you're going to learn things along the way that are not, that maybe reasons why you don't want to pursue that and you don't want to continue down it. And, and I think that that's a really important lesson. It will help you. It'll be part of your journey to go on to do whatever you're meant to do. So I always, here's another gem too, that I always say to people, that so often I'll meet people and they'll be like, oh, that last role was a waste of time. I shouldn't have ever done that. And I think you have to believe that every place you land, that was part of your journey. And the challenge is that you have to figure out, why were you there? Like, what was it? What brought you there? And what can you learn? Because when you have things that didn't work out the way that you thought they were going to, or, challenging times or failures along the way, that is a learning, right? That is something that you're going to learn. And you have to really embrace that. Don't look at it as a waste of time. It just made you better, and it made you more educated about what you want. And I think that is so, so important.
Yeah, and you have Gen Zs in the house, so you understand. And you're all over social media. Obviously, you have this book, so you understand this new wave of social media that can make us Gen Zs quite depressed, because we see these people living these lives, private jets. They have everything, and we're sitting here sometimes 22, 23, 24, maybe even 26 years old, and we just get sad, like we're not there. We try to compare ourselves, and Instagram shows a lot of the makeup, the fake scenes, the love. You don't see the grit behind it. You don't see what it took you to build this company. What's your advice for, a 21-year-old who looks at social media and says, I'm behind, like, look at what this so-and-so is doing?
It's great. I mean, the whole imposter syndrome, and, it's definitely, there are few and far between. And I think that the other piece that I'll say too, is that there's this other element that isn't talked about as much, although I think it's a huge trend for 2021 and beyond, is this idea of happiness and well-being and health. And if you are not happy with what you are doing every single day, and you're hustling, you're whatever you want to call it, and you don't love what you're doing every single day, then things start to break, right? The most unhappy people are the ones that are you know looking at trying to chase the dream, but they haven't really figured out that is exactly what they want. And I mean, I have a lot of friends many who have more money than I do, that are billionaires, and they're divorced, they're not very happy people at all. They don't sit there and think about, gosh, what can I do today that is really going to make me happy? Instead, it's all they're chasing something that they're not even that passionate about. And I think it's really, really important for people to look at it. And I think that the happiest people are really the ones that will do what they want to be doing every single day. Just because everybody's making lots of money as an entrepreneur or on Wall Street or whatever, is that what you want to do? Because I think like that is a conversation, whether you're just graduating from school, or you're sitting down the road thinking, gosh, why did I do that other thing? I mean, figure out what you want to do, and that is what is going to help you in order to really gain this happiness. The one other thing that I will say on that topic too is, and I've gotten in some trouble at some universities talking about this, but we live in this world where the journey, the path that after we, get out of school or get started working or whatever however you want to look at it is, we go get our first job, and then we become a manager, and then we become a director, and then we become a VP, and then, maybe we become the CEO of the company. And unfortunately, what happens as you grow in all of those ranks is that you're less and less doing what you love every single day. You're managing, you're mentoring, you're signing off on, things for the corporation. And so you are no longer innovating. You are no longer learning every single day. So different than kind of some of the challenges that you have. I have a whole other group of people that have read my book that have come to me and said, why did I stop taking risks? I'm a, C-suite executive. I've got enough money in the bank. I stopped taking risks a long time ago, and I'm not happy. I don't learn every single day. And I'm sitting here looking at my life and thinking, what, like, I've accomplished that. Everybody's looking at me saying, you've accomplished that. But why don't I, at this point, go out and start a beverage company or do something that I'm really passionate about, improve people's health? And I think that what the pandemic brought for so many people is that tomorrow, right? If things are not going to be the same, like gone are the days where you're guaranteed a pension in your company. Pensions are few and far between inside of companies, right? And you could get, laid off tomorrow. I mean, the number of people over the years, particularly for millennials, where they've joined, the well-funded startup, and then it like implodes because a founder behaves badly, right? Or, or the fund, something happens there. And we've seen this over and over again over the years. So nothing is forever, right? There is risk in so many different areas, but I think for this group to recognize is like, that is just another reason to go and figure out, what is it that I really love doing? And that if those risks happen, if a pandemic happens, if, what am I going to be happy doing? And that's the hardest thing that you have to figure out, is what is it that you really enjoy doing? What are you curious about? Because if you're curious and you lead with that I really believe that the rest kind of figures itself out.
I love that. And I think the fact that people in the audience can listen to this and hear the fact that, hey, even people that have billions of dollars have all the money in the world still are fine. They have issues too. They have issues just like all of us. So I think that's such a big part that you mentioned. So thank you for sharing that. The book is called Undaunted: Overcoming Doubts Plus Doubters. Can you describe to us, because it's on the same topic, sometimes we're sad, we're depressed about what we just talked about, but money's not everything. But on the concept of doubt and doubters, that's another thing us Gen Z struggle with, because we get that all the time, because now we're so much more out there. We're on TikTok. We talk about building clothing brands, building companies, and it's always, you can't do that. So can you talk a little bit about, overcoming doubt in your life? What was one of your biggest doubters?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd say that everybody has doubts. Everybody has doubts and fears. And if you hear from somebody that they don't have doubts and fears, they're lying, right? Everybody has them. Even billionaires have them, right? There's fears of all sorts. But I think that the doubts really start with yourself, and particularly when you're going out and taking a risk, you're going and starting a new company, you're, going to a new city, you're whatever it is, you're thinking, I don't know if this is all going to work out. Well, then you start to meet people in your journey who have more experience, who, are really those people that we talked about earlier that are, maybe not purposely entering your, maybe not, family's the worst, they never want you to take any risks. So they're friends, they're like, what are you doing, leaving tech and starting a beverage company? And so that just like makes your own doubts so much greater, right? And so for me, I think that it's really as simple as understanding that you have to figure out that you're going to make a go. at getting over those doubts, and that you're always going to have fears. But if you think back on times when you felt that way and you got over your fears, that is when, you maybe you didn't stop at the time to think about it, but it never was really as bad as you thought. Or I should say, usually 99% of the time, it's not as bad as you thought. And you got through something, and maybe you were really proud of it that you did, because it was a scary situation for you. And then you pulled through. And I think that the more of those times that you have, you become known as resilient. You become known as fearless, right? And then when real stuff happens to you, where you've got to take it on, you have your own kind of coping mechanism to saying, okay, well, I have to be zen about it. I have to think about, what can I do in this situation? What are those steps? And I have to not stay complacent, and instead just keep moving forward. And it really is pretty simple. Once you kind of get a hold of what steps you really have to do, that's when you figure that out. But that's stuff that I've learned along the way. And I think more than anything, I wanted people to know about that too, that we all have doubts, we all have doubters, but it's just a matter of getting through them. And yeah, I mean, everything from getting the first bottle on the shelf. I mean, it sounds like a great idea. And then you're like, oh, wait, what if he's not there? What if he says no? Right. It's kind of like thinking somebody says your baby's ugly, right? I mean, it's suddenly you're sitting here, oh my God, I thought it was so great, but it wasn't. I mean, all of those things have happened to me over the years.
Yeah, yeah, and the fact that you've built such a big company, but it's hard for people to look back sometimes and be like, "Hey, you had those rejections early on. I'm sure you've had a lot of
Totally.
them." You talk about it in the book. What does it feel like though to go from that situation where you had a lot of doubt, a lot of doubters, and even in the book you talk about your own doubts and your own fears. Has that shifted, or do you still have your own doubts and own fears now?
I think you always do, right? And I think great entrepreneurs too, especially as you start to continue to bring challenges. I mean, that's how you ultimately grow personally as well as in your business, right? The best entrepreneurs think about the entrepreneurial journey as a puzzle, and they keep adding pieces onto the puzzle. And sometimes pieces of the puzzle get ripped out from under you, and they go away, and you're like, oh no, what am I going to do? I can't finish the puzzle. And then what you realize is that if you keep going and you keep building, maybe some of those puzzle pieces come back. Maybe you didn't need them. Maybe it's prettier without it. And that is the stuff that I've learned along the way, that you just have to just keep doing. You have to keep building the puzzle. And I think that people call it hustle. I guess you could call it that. I think more than anything, you figure out what can you do is the most important thing. And no matter what industry that you're in, asking yourself that question when you do feel stuck, saying to yourself, what can I do right now, is such an important thing that I think so many people forget. And if you say that to yourself, then you'll say, well, I could go get in my car and go to Whole Foods and see what happens along the way. And I think also just trust the journey. I mean, there's things along the way that are not going to work out the way that you wanted them to, and you give it your best shot, and then you move on, and you don't stay complacent. You keep figuring out, what can you do? And that's the most important mindset to be in.
Yeah, and on that topic of things not working out the way that you planned them, at Hint, can you talk about a time where you really thought something was going to go the way you planned it, and then it just it didn't work out?
Yeah, I mean, one of them with one of our partners, Starbucks. We had gotten into Starbucks. That was like a big day in our timeline, right? We're going nationwide in Starbucks, lots of thousands and thousands of stores. And I remember asking the buyer what success was, like what would be the number of bottles per store per day that they would be happy about. So they had said a bottle and a half per store per day, and we're going to be delighted. And I'm like, great. So that was my goal. And in 6 months, we achieved that goal. And then for the next year after that, so we're a year and a half into the relationship, I'm, sitting pretty. I'm very confident because we were killing it. We were doing almost 3 bottles per store per day. So I'm delighted. Everybody's happy. Then there's a buyer change at Starbucks, and the new buyer comes in and she says, wanted to meet you and heard we had a partnership with you for the last year and a half. We're changing strategy. And I'm like, changing strategy? So what's your new strategy? Well, it comes from the top and we're going to put more food in the case, higher margin. You guys sell your product for like $2 a bottle, or we sell your product for $2 a bottle. We can sell sandwiches for like $8 to $12 per sandwich. So higher margin business, higher ring, the whole thing. So I'm like, what am I going to say to that? I was totally caught off guard. I had no idea what to say. And so I remember asking, so when is this happening? And they said 2 weeks. So I had all this inventory all set up so that we could deliver the product in our warehouse that was going to go bad. I had millions of dollars of inventory. I had investors. I was freaking out. And that's when I remember like crying for a few. I don't cry very often. I definitely cried for a few days. And then I snapped out of it. And I said, okay, I had a team of people inside my company. I said, listen, it's bad, but we cannot stay complacent. We have to figure out how to move forward. We have to figure out what to do with this product that we have in the warehouse. And we also need to be grateful to the fact that Starbucks gave us a 1.5 year runway. They exposed us to markets that we would have never even been in. And there are people out there that have been buying our product at Starbucks over the years. Now we have to figure out how to let them know that we're available in other locations. And I hadn't figured out that problem yet, like how to solve that problem yet. And I got an email from a Starbucks buyer, and they were launching this new grocery business and they wanted to talk to me. And I thought, this is a tiny little business at the time for Jeff Bezos. And I was, around when he was launching books, and have a whole story around my experience of building a bookshelf with Jeff Bezos, which,
Wow.
crazy story. But anyway, with Amazon, they wanted to launch Hint in their grocery business, and they quickly did that because I said to the buyer, they wanted to know how fast I could get them product. And I said, oh, I have a bunch in our warehouse. And he said, oh, that's great, because I buy a Hint every morning when I get my latte. So I thought, okay, well, that's good. I mean, I don't have to tell him that we're getting kicked out of Starbucks. Instead, I'll just, sort of pretend that I didn't hear that. So we go into Amazon, and we become one of the #1 products on Amazon and Amazon grocery. It was about 1 year into that relationship, still not back in Starbucks. It was about 1 year into the relationship with with Amazon, when I'm up in Seattle. And he said, the gentleman who was our account manager, who had actually brought us in initially, said, it's really interesting about your product, because people who are buying Hint on Amazon are also buying things like diabetes monitors and kind of like other things in other categories that has a healthy halo over it. And I said, that is really interesting, understanding and knowing that that's why I started the company, to be able to get healthier. And he said, yeah, other like beverage companies, they don't really do that. The consumer who comes in and buys those products, they buy this and then they buy other stuff that is probably not great for them. But there's clearly this healthy halo that is really interesting. And I said to the Amazon buyer, can I reach out to a few of my customers? You have the data. And he said, Jeff Bezos won't give you the data. And by the way, that is Amazon's data. That isn't your data. Yeah. So this is in 2012. And I said, okay, well, I think it's my customer. I mean, I developed the product. I like, I'm selling you the product. And they said, yeah, but once I'm the one that does the sale. So that is my customer. And you transferred the customer over to me. And it was just this clarity that at that moment where I remember getting on my Southwest flight coming back to San Francisco and thinking, wow, if I would have had the relationship with the customer inside of Starbucks, then I would have been able to tell the customer, hey, we're no longer doing this at Starbucks. We're no longer in here. And instead, come to this store or come to Amazon or whatever. But I didn't have that relationship with the customer. And Amazon's not going to give me the customer data. So the only way that I can actually get that relationship with the customer and offer them everything that we do is to launch drinkhint.com. And I looked back on that moment and thought about the Starbucks. My reason for being in Starbucks was, I mean, first of all, to expose us throughout the country to lots and lots of people, but in addition to get this clearer understanding of the importance of data and like this understanding of the relationship with the customer, your relationship with the customer. It doesn't mean that you don't sell in Amazon or Starbucks or Target or Costco or whatever. But if you don't have the relationship with the customer and you get discontinued, the store goes out of business, whatever it is, you're stuck. And so my total purpose for launching drinkhint.com was to have a relationship with some customers. Today, fast forward, over 50% of our business is now on drinkhint.com.
Wow.
We still are, during the pandemic, when lots of stores shut down or were closed temporarily, limited hours, whatever, we were all told to shelter in place. The fact that I had a direct to consumer business as a beverage company was huge, huge. And it's like, and what was so interesting is that our direct to consumer business tripled during the pandemic. Wow. And our overall business grew over 50%. Because what I realized is that the customer, still our customer who buys online, still goes into Costco. They still, if they see a variety pack that they don't see online, or it's like an impulse buy, they're going to pick it up if it's a good price, whatever it is. But the customer controls exactly where they buy. It doesn't mean that they're only shopping online or only Costco or whatever. They go to multiple places and they look at your brand and they want to buy your brand. And so I think more than anything, in summary, it's another example of, you're going to have points along the way that are just, they're places where you learn. They're places where you pick up little tidbits about what your true purpose is. And the last 17 months of, if we didn't have a direct relationship with the consumer, we would be done. Right. And so many people were just crushed by not being ahead of it in the beverage industry, not maybe being too reliant on Amazon, and they weren't prioritized in their algorithm, whatever it is. So anyway, I just think it all happens for a reason. And the journey is just, that even if the Starbucks situation didn't turn out the way that I wanted, I learned a lot. And it's not about hating Starbucks or hating on, partners that discontinue you. It's about learning, and it's about figuring out what is that thing that I should have learned. I should have had more opportunities, lined up. Don't get stuck not diversifying either. That's a whole other point of it. So many things that I learned along the way.
And I think, it's crazy to see how full circle that came, because you took a situation, that a lot of us could have been like, oh, this is it. This is our biggest thing. Let's just close the doors. Let's move on. You took that situation, stopped crying, and figured out, how can we make this better? And it came back full circle. Look at the COVID, in the pandemic, we saw the amount of small businesses, even big businesses that closed, went out of business. You guys, your sales went up. So you found a way to hedge yourself, and you bounced back. And I just really hope the audience can take that mantra from this, is the fact that you bounced back, regardless of the grim situation. It's insane.
Yeah. And figuring out what you can do. And I think, also goes back to, it's not that you don't listen to other people, but I mean, if you only are talking to people in your own industry, then they're all, typically having a pity party for themselves, right? It's the people in the restaurant industry that were figuring out, what can we do? And they were not stopping. And maybe they were looking at other industries to try and figure out, like, how do I move forward? I gained the greatest motivation from looking at other industries. If I sit there and look at, my industry, that's not where, my inspiration typically comes from. Every once in a while, it's interesting, but instead I look around at other industries and try and apply those. Even conferences or webinars, I'll land in places where, people are like, wow, that was so interesting that you were in there, because I want to learn. Right. And then you bring that learning into what you do and what you're passionate about every single day. And it really is like reverse of what other people do. But if you talk to the best innovators, they lead their days with curiosity. They're reading constantly. They're constantly like thinking about things that maybe other people are not thinking about, because it like helps them to, it keeps the energy going. It keeps their brain engaged because they're constantly learning. And I think that people need to, that would be my biggest advice, is go think about that and learn from it. If you don't have an appreciation, let's say you're an engineer and you don't have an appreciation for marketing, you don't really understand, you think it's just like a bunch of fluff or whatever, go take some classes, go sit in on some of, these forums where people are talking about, marketing and branding and whatever, because you may walk away from there after a little while and think, God, it's not what I thought at all. And I could actually learn some things, and it's really interesting. I think it's being willing to learn, being willing to not be the wisest in the room, the most knowledgeable in the room. Everyone should be thinking about that every single day.
And you're living proof of this. You've built a huge, successful company that you could have easily said, hey, you know what, I'm done. Everything's good. I want to retire. But instead, you're continuing, building. You're all over social media. You have a podcast. Podcasts are skyrocketing. We saw Apple launch a subscription podcast. Facebook is working on it. We were just speaking about Clubhouse before this. But if the listeners are like me, I could listen to your stories all day. If we go on Amazon and, we're looking up your book right now, what does that word mean, undaunted? And why is that the overarching message throughout that? What?
I think it's a commitment to yourself to live this way. And that means going out and trying and doing it in a way that is really for you, and understanding what is most important for you, and knowing that you're going to have fears, you're going to have doubts along the way. But what's most important for you is to put stakes in the ground of saying, I'm going to live undaunted. I'm going to go take on those fears. I don't want to live a life where I've got walls around me and I don't believe that I'm capable. I don't believe that I can do something. Instead, go figure out, what can you do? What walls did you knock down this week? I mean, that's the fun stuff, right? That's the stuff that, people get motivated just going and doing those things. And it's rare that if you live a life of putting these challenges in front of yourself, you don't have to go start a company if you don't want to, right? I think that it's really about just little challenges along the way, trying to figure out what are these things that maybe I feared or that I don't think I can do, and then just go out and try them and do them. And maybe you'll fail, but maybe you learn things about yourself that you got further than you ever thought you could be. Maybe you thought, it was one thing, and then now it's another after you've experienced it. And so put these things into your journey and really live undaunted.
I love that. And I read your book over a month ago. And for me, being vulnerable here, I've struggled with weight loss over the last 4 or 5 years. I've lost 100 pounds and I'm struggling to lose the rest of my weight. But I read your book a month ago, and outside of people that can be doubting you, or those mental thoughts of doubts of I don't think I can do it again. I love to go back to your book to just go through key points where it's like, oh my gosh, I can do this. And that's what I love
Yeah.
about, living undaunted, that doesn't matter what happened in the past, doesn't matter what he said, she said, I could do this.
Yeah, and I think you just believe that you can do it. And the other thing is that as I was sharing with an entrepreneur earlier today, the beautiful thing that this world that we live in is that you can actually go try something. And I guarantee you, when you go try something, you actually learn things. You learn about industry. Maybe the first steps are researching an industry and learning things along the way. It's fun to learn. We stop learning when we stop going to school so often. Not everybody, but many people do. Instead, they think that that the key to success is to be a big manager or be a like have billions of dollars. But again, going back to what really makes people satisfied and happy, it's really going out and learning and constantly leading with learning.
And what do you tell, because again, we want to close out here because I've taken up so much of your time, but it's an amazing conversation. What do you tell an entrepreneur, or maybe even a 21-year-old going to the workforce right now? They're just graduating. What do you tell them when they say, I'm scared to fail. I don't want to lose my money. I'm just scared. What's your greatest advice?
Well, I think it really is about, I think if if you find that thing that you really love doing, that you're really passionate about, and you focus on that, I think that that is really the thing to focus on. And you got to start somewhere and go and figure out, what it is that you're going to do that is meaningful to you too. And I think that that's the most important thing. Start somewhere though. Like it's better than, not starting. And I think that that's a really, really, important piece. And I, I think so often we just forget about that though.
Yeah, and you're living proof. You've accomplished so much, and you didn't matter what the doubt was. It doesn't matter as, oh, it's a water company. Oh, Silicon Valley, venture capitalists. Look at the predominantly the industry. It was men, white men that dominated it,
Totally.
and now look, you are living proof, and you're paving the way for that next generation. So we got to thank you for inspiring us.
Thank you so much. Well, this has been really fun sharing my story with you guys and super excited to hear from you all. Hopefully you'll get a chance to read the book, and there's a lot of stories in there. And I think more than anything, what I've heard from people is that it's inspiring them to go out and just try and do things and know that we're our own worst enemy so much of the time, and tell ourselves that we can't actually go and accomplish something. Don't focus on other people and instead focus on doing what you want to do and doing it really well.
Yeah, and look, I'm telling you guys, outside of this podcast, the fact that I read this and I was at a tough point in my life, and I can still go back and just look at little points in there and be like, I got this, I can do this. It's phenomenal. So, I'm going to post everything in the descriptions, but where can people go find you on social media? Because you post some really cool Instagram reels that
Oh,
motivate
thank
me
you.
daily. Where can we
Thank
find
you.
you?
Kara Goldin, with an I. And actually, my pandemic project was I wanted to figure out TikTok. Don't worry, I'm not dancing on there with my kids. I was like, I'm not that great of a dancer, and my kids would be horrified, right? But what I did was I actually took a lot of my conversations that I've had and some of my talks that I've done, and it's not a million views, but or a million subscribers, but it's over 40,000 now, and it's continuing
Cool.
to grow. And I think more than anything, what I've seen on TikTok is that there's a huge audience of Gen Zers that are on there that are really interested in being entrepreneurs. And so the stuff that I'm posting on there is taking little snippets from a lot of my talks and sharing some of the things that I've learned along the way that maybe other people, for whatever reason, haven't been saying about entrepreneurism. Not just that it's, this glitzy and thing to go and do, but also understanding that the key thing is knowing what, you can control, and also just going out and trying. So anyway, Kara Goldin with an I across all platforms, but that one's really fun in particular.
Love that. Definitely. I'll go check out your TikTok after this. But that is Kara Goldin, the founder and CEO of Hint, Undaunted, Overcoming Doubts Plus Doubters. Phenomenal book that I will post in the description below. You guys have to read this book. It's inspirational. And Kara, thank you so
Thank
much for your
you.
time. And thank you for telling us that we can overcome the doubt, the doubters.
Definitely. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Samir here from the More We Know podcast, aka Mir. If you joined this episode with Kara Goldin, make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. And please leave a review. The reviews help me and give me feedback on what to do for my next episode. And again, go check out Kara's book on Amazon. Her story really inspired me today. I don't know about you, but I am ready to live an undaunted life. Thank you guys, and I'll see you next time, because the more we know, the more we grow.